short legs. I said, I don't know if I said, he said,
It's a long way.
I said, I can't get it right.
Well, welcome to the last day of school, everyone. Last day of school, everyone has graduated except for Alan. He's getting held back.
Been there, done that.
I'm sure he has an incomplete, right? Yep.
Several.
Lack of class participation.
Yes. Not to mention plagiarism.
I'm sorry that I missed the first several sessions of this class. I hit myself for not coming when I finished it. I'm sorry.
All right, I'll give you all A's on that. That's the mark of a really bad teacher, right? I feel bad for you. Okay, I'll give you A's.
Nobody ever challenges that grade.
No, indeed. Well, this is the last session of our Tuesday morning Bible study until next year. And next year I've already got a design for the Bible study.
Which is?
It'll be worship. So the entire year we're going to look at the liturgy of the church, worship, why, church architecture, vestments and paraments, music and hymns.
History of liturgy?
Yep, the history of the liturgy.
Good.
It'll be very, very in-depth look at worship because we'll be doing it for an entire year. So
Yeah, that'll be good. When I was in third grade, our third, fourth, and fifth grade classroom studied page 5 and page 15, and part of our memory work for a while was memorizing every single part, what
Sure.
it meant, what it was,
Yeah.
and all that, which was, I found fascinating, really helps you understand better what's going on.
yeah,
And I wish everyone would have that, because you just can go through this, it can become so familiar that you don't appreciate it or realize what it's in there. And then of course,
Yep.
some churches are not at all liturgical. They kind of
Yeah.
have welcome and songs and a few readings and a message and a prayer, and they're done. And it's like, was there any confession of sins and other important things?
yeah. Well, yeah, we're definitely going to get into that. It's really become a matter of taste or personal preference, or a matter of what pastors and worship leaders think people will like. So all of that's pretty problematic for various
Yeah.
reasons. The most problematic reason would be, who are you, oh worship leader, with your, tight jeans and your stool to say that you know better than 20 centuries of, 20 centuries of tried and true practice around the world and in various cultures. And that's one reason why Vatican II is so jarring for so many people, because all of a sudden, you've had a Latin Mass for 19 centuries, and now all of a sudden the vernacular is opened up, and you have a jazz Mass and folk Mass and all these other masses,
Polka Mass.
clown Mass recently in Germany. You have all sorts of things opened up now, because now anybody feels that he or she can tinker with the liturgy and change it. But the beauty of the liturgy is that there are safeguards that are scriptural and traditional to protect us from going our own way and doing our own thing. Because we know the law of belief becomes the law of prayer becomes the law of belief, which is an old maxim by Prosper of Aquitaine. So basically, how you practice, how you pray, how you sing, eventually determines what you actually believe, eventually determines the content of what you believe. So Christians, before they wrote the Nicene and the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed, which is the Nicene Creed we say in church, they baptized babies in the name of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They just had never had to argue their position before. But that law of belief eventually that law of prayer, that law of the liturgy eventually did become the law of belief. It was defended on doctrinal grounds. So the more clown masses you have, eventually Jesus becomes a clown in your doctrine, right?
Yeah, in our liturgy, you can go to find all the Bible verses that it's based on. That's cool. But you look at some of these others and the words they use, where in the heck are they getting those words from? You can't quite figure it out. Maybe it's some translation of idea that was in the Bible, but you have no idea.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, or just someone made it up the day before. You know, why not? That's kind of anything is acceptable. Same goes with church architecture. There's the famous building in Orange County, California called the Crystal Cathedral, but it was bought by the Catholics maybe in 2008 or something like that. I don't remember when the Catholics bought it, but they renamed it Christ Cathedral, and it was designed by postmodern architects Philip Cortelyou Johnson and John Berge, and then built in 1981. So that is, I mean, that looks like something. I mean, what does that even look like?
That big flat building is the church?
That's the church. That's the Christ Cathedral in Orange County. It's huge. It can fit a ton of people. It's all glass, you know. I'm sure the inside is quite nice, but yeah, that's the church.
What's that big building in the back?
I don't know, some.
That tall.
Oh, that's actually part of it. That's
Oh,
basically the
like
bell
a
tower,
steeple
Carillon.
type thing. Oh,
Yeah.
really? Okay.
Bell tower, Carillon. type
I
thing.
was there in early '82, and it was a gray day, and all you saw was all the metal holding everything up and glass, and it looked really ugly. Maybe on a sunny day it looks good, but on a gray day it was really awful looking, I thought.
Yeah. It looks, I mean, it's just,
Doesn't look inviting.
no.
No. Not
Does
at
it look
all.
like it would
It's not like what
lift
I
your
imagine,
spirit up to
you
heaven?
know, talk on TV.
Does it look like it'd be a building filled with stained glass, or, I mean, any traditional? I'm sure it's a very cool building, right? You go inside, there are probably a bunch of atriums and, you know, interesting stairwells and really nice bathrooms. But is it worth it? Is it worth it to depart that much from traditional forms? And it's important to remember too that, you know, churches in the Middle Ages, you know, churches were a part of the architecture of the time, and the architecture of the time was fed or nourished by the great cathedrals. But nowadays, you know, no architect is being influenced by current church design. Current church design is just going off in all these weird postmodern directions, and that's why so many new buildings are so odd. And well, one would be the Art Institute of Minneapolis. You know, Minneapolis Art Institute, MAD. You know how that's almost. There are parts of that building that feel like they're going to fall on you. You know, you feel just small and insignificant when you walk into it. There's nothing grand or stately about that building. It's just kind of a big mass of concrete and glass. And that's what a lot of churches look like, just kind of a big mass of concrete and glass, and you just feel small. The worst is St. John's University in Collegeville. That campus is all from the early 60s, late 50s. Oh man, that's before postmodernism. That's the height of modernism, and it's just, yeah, it's very dehumanizing. It doesn't feel like a church. It's very impressive and very interesting, but you know.
As opposed to some of the cathedrals and stuff in Europe, when you walk in, you get that awesome feeling of God is here. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't get that from a building like that.
No, I mean, that sums it up perfectly.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. You're right, Lucy. You're right. All right, well, we're talking about the future of Christianity today. So we'll start in our year 2021 and then kind of look at global trends and estimates and ideas and shifts. And we're going to look a lot at geography today and numbers. And then I conclude with theological trends. So that's going to be a little bit more speculative. But that'll hopefully kind of show you where the academy and Christian academic writing is headed in the 21st century. It's headed some good places and some pretty weird places. But let's begin in the scriptures as we always do with John 14:6.
14:16 or
14:16.
And I will pray the Father, and he shall give you another comforter, that he may abide with you forever.
Thank you, Darlene. So that's the age we're living in now, right? The age of the Holy Spirit. The Comforter is with us now and has been guiding the church since the church's birthday, Pentecost, right? Shortly after the ascension of our Lord. And so we have to remember that we're in the age of Pentecost right now, the age of the Holy Spirit. Then let's go to Matthew 24, verses 36 and 44.
No one knows about that day or hour, or even the angels or not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. And 24. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come in an hour when you do not expect him.
So it's obviously nothing new or radical, but we're living in the era of the Holy Spirit. That means we're living in the last days, and we're preparing ourselves in the world for the second coming of Christ, which has a technical name. It's called the parousia, which just means coming or appearance. The parousia is the second coming of Christ, when he will manifest himself again, when he will come as the Son of Man and judge the world. That's what we're preparing ourselves for. So there's there's a great urgency to what we do as Christians. You know, we don't get around later to sharing the good news with our neighbor, or get around later to establishing a new school, or get around later to figuring out how our finances can help the mission of the church. You know, we do it now because the Lord could return at any time. There's an urgency to all of this.
We do.
I mean,
I get, you had the opportunity, you didn't do anything, dummy, you just sat there with your mouth closed.
yeah,
You know, too often. Next time.
too often.
Next time.
Right. Tomorrow. All right, 2 Peter 3, verse 10.
But the day of the Lord will come like a thief. The heavens will disappear with a roar. The elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything in it will be laid bare.
Okay, so not only will our Lord Jesus return to us, but all of the human pursuits that we have, and our worldly accomplishments, and the paradise that we're trying to create, that is also called Babel, will all be burned away and dissolved, and there will be not a trace of it left. There won't be NFL teams in the new heavens and the new earth. There won't be a president. You know, there won't be big farms buying out small farms. There won't be clothes. You know, there will be God's people living with the Lamb of God in a kingdom that will have no end.
There won't be no night.
Yeah, there will be no night. Right.
Beck puts that last part of that verse this way, and what was done on it will be shown.
Yeah.
So what our lives have accomplished or done,
There will be no
by everybody.
Right, there will be no hiding. I sort of think of, you know, I've been watching a lot of World War II documentaries the last 31 years of my life, and it's always so interesting to me, the SS officers and concentration camp guards, and then other German officers and soldiers who were involved with war crimes, how they ended up escaping, and so many of them went to Spain, Switzerland, and Argentina especially. And then many of them just tried to become citizens in Germany and take new names, but eventually they were ratted out by other anti-Nazi Germans. But, you know, if you're a concentration camp guard and you were involved in the murder of all these people, and you try to escape and forget that part of your life, you know, they were almost all of them discovered. And then if they weren't discovered immediately after World War II, then when the State of Israel was formed, Israel made special, basically hit teams that went to South America and found former SS officials and then kind of executed them on the spot. So a lot of it was, there's a movie about that with Gregory Peck. Boys from Brazil. Gregory Peck plays a Nazi. Everybody ever see that one? Anybody like Gregory Peck?
Very much.
Oh, he's one of my faves. He's great. He's one of the best. All right, and then let's end in Revelation 1, verse 7. So Revelation 1, verse 7.
Look, he comes with the clouds of heaven, and everyone will see him, even those who pierced him. And all the nations of the earth will weep because of him. Yes, amen.
That's a picture that John receives of the end, of what is right, kind of in the process of happening, because Jesus is in the process of preparing to come. The gospel is being spread to all the nations of the earth, and he will come on the clouds. Lo, he comes on clouds descending, right? And then Revelation 22, verse 12 is where we will end in the scriptures.
See, I come soon, and my reward is with me, to repay all according to their deeds.
Okay, thank you. Behold, I am coming soon. Right? Those are the words of our Lord. Behold, I'm coming soon. We also know with the Lord, 1,000 years is like a day, and a day is like 1,000 years. So it was popular in kind of critical Bible scholarship in Germany in the 2 centuries ago, in the 19th century and then turn of the 20th century, to say, the existence of Christianity is explained, institutionalized Christianity is explained by the delay of the parousia, by the fact that Jesus did not return during the disciples' lifetimes. And then eventually the last disciple, John, was about to die. And these German scholars basically pictured everyone gathered around John and looking at their watches. And then John died and then saying, where's Jesus? Well, I guess we better invent Christianity. And that's why the institution of Christianity was founded with bishops and deacons and deaconesses and with pastors and with church buildings and with missionary activity. And that's been debunked. Because the Old Testament, the New Testament, there's no kind of modern conception of time like we have it, where if something doesn't happen for a year, we forget about it and we think it's never going to happen, right? There's not any conception of time. Time is always kind of wrapped around or folded in on itself, and past, present, and future. God beholds past, present, and future simultaneously, because he's outside of time. He's not a contingent, time-bound being, but is being and is responsible for ourselves having being. And so, there's no delay. There's only a delay if you think that God is either not almighty or that he is bound by our time or something, but he's not. So, again, with the Lord, 1,000 years is like a day, and a day is like 1,000 years, right? He could blink, and then in the time it takes God to blink, 5,000 more years of human history will have passed. And so we trust what Paul says too, and in his letters, that the coming of the Lord will be quick, and there will be 2 people in a field, and one will be taken by the Lord, and one will not be taken by the Lord. And that rapture imagery is actually not so much about being what's it going to be like to be left behind, but it's more about the suddenness and quickness of Christ coming. It will come, and we won't expect it.
Yeah, and it's about God choosing this one because of the faith he has in his heart, and not choosing that one because he doesn't have that faith.
Right.
It's not about, this guy's going up to heaven, he's going to be there for a while. The rest of us are still wandering around on the earth, and in later time we'll get there.
Yeah. Right. 19th century Schofield Bible and Baptist and evangelical premillennial dispensationalism and all that stuff.
And this one story was told to me about how we tend to forget things. This parent and a family, when the kid was confirmed, he got this little box, and inside the box was a note. We promise to buy you and give you a brand new car. Okay? So the kid is thinking, oh man, when I graduate from high school, I'm going to get a brand new car. So on his graduation, here's this little box. Oh God, it's got the key in it, it's got the key in it. He opens it up and there's a note in it that says, we promise to give you a brand new car. Maybe when I graduate from college, yes. So here's this little box. He knows the key is in it this time. Opens it up. We promise to give you a brand new car. And then it's when he gets married. And it's when it's going to have his first child. And here, later in life, he gets another box. He doesn't even open it. Because he knows it's just going to be a note in there. What was actually in there was the keys to a brand new car. And, sometimes we forget that God has given us this promise, and yet we kind of let it slide. Forget it because, well, been all these years and nothing's happened. Why do I think it's going to happen now?
Mm-hmm. That's how the Bible talks too. People are busy eating and drinking, and not preparing themselves for God's manifestation in Christ at the second coming. Right? People are busy and get caught up and building bigger barns, and there are all sorts of places in the Bible that kind of echo that curious little parable that you've told. That's good. And the keys were to a Ferrari.
Why? Because as you brought up the time dimension of God,
Uh-huh.
I don't think we as human beings understand it very well yet. Why do we not think that time isn't already here, that it's being done exactly as it was told that it was being done, only it's being done in a way that stretches that time out as we are looking at it and brings it back and goes all over the place. We as human beings think about time as being born and you die and the time on the clock and all these things that are supposed to happen systematically. That's not necessarily the way God would have done that, thought that, or worked with it that way.
Sure.
So I'm not so sure why we don't think that I am coming soon doesn't mean that soon is already here.
I would say just because we as humans, we're temporal, and so it's impossible for us to conceive of reality outside of time or in a non-chronological way. You're born and you get old and you die, and no human except for Benjamin Button in that short story and then that terrible movie experienced the opposite, where he was born as an old man and then eventually became younger until he was a little baby, and then I guess he died. That was a short story though by Washington Irving, I think.
I think you're right.
Yeah, Washington Irving. But because we experience, we age, things break down. There's no way for, we can kind of dive into metaphysics and think about the fact that God is outside of time, we're not bound by time, but we can't experience what that is, or what that feels like, and for us, we can't see the future. We can remember the past, but we remember the past in the present, but when we've experienced the present, it's already past. So we're in the flux of time, and we can't escape out of the flux of time. We're always subject to it.
Yep.
I look at it in a different way. Look out into the universe. Can you see a wall out there?
Just the darkness.
There's no end to it.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
and
not that we've seen.
when I look at everlasting life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Sure.
there's no wall that you can see when you look out into the heavens.
Yeah, just basically
There's no beginning and no end to it.
there's just expansion, and there's
Expansion,
freedom,
expansion.
and that's what eternal life will be for us: expansion and freedom, and more, which we
Yeah.
can't conceive of right now.
You can't see it.
Right. All right, well, let's dive into some of the trends in global Christianity. We sort of talked about this when we had our lesson on the Edinburgh Missionary Conference. We kind of touched on kind of what Christianity will look like in the future. But this lesson, I did way more work on that. We're not talking about the past, we're only talking about the present and the future here. So currently there are about 544 million confessed Christians in Europe, compared to 640 million Christians in Africa and 604 million Christians in Asia. Europe's Christian growth rate has flattened out. So you think just 100 years ago, just after World War I, after the Edinburgh Missionary Conference, the whole point of global missions was to make sure the gospel penetrated the deep, dark parts of Africa, or the uncivilized Pacific Islands, or any of these other places, that Europeans perceived were backward or lost or something. Well, it turns out in just a century later, they're the ones who are Christian and who are sending out missionaries, and that's called reverse missions. When, say, a little Pacific island or Indonesia or Madagascar will send Christian missionaries into Europe and into North America. And we see that happening today because if you look at the numbers, Europe has been outpaced by Asia and by Africa.
Well, when we were there over in Africa, West Africa, that was their question. Should we be sending missionaries to the United States?
Yeah.
And I thought, oh man, that's what a good idea, but a terrible thing to be having others who are just becoming Christians saying, "It's time for us to send a missionary."
Yeah. Yeah.
The fastest growing Christianity places in Africa.
Yeah. Yep, we're going to get way more into that right now. So currently, some scholars such as Philip Jenkins of Baylor University, he's one who's written a couple of books on this subject, and there are several others. They're connecting religiosity to fertility rates, which maybe you've heard of this before. In countries with low fertility rates, 1.2, it shouldn't be percent, it should be 1.2 children per woman. So that's how that's basically measured. So low fertility rates. So basically, if you're below 2, you're kind of you're at a flat place. If you're at 1 or less, you're declining. So if each couple is producing fewer than one child, more people are dying than are being born, and that's how it looks right now in a place like
That's the way
Iceland.
it is here.
Yeah, and here I think right now is
America.
1.7. I want to say 1.7, and then Norway, Sweden are around 1.7, 1.6, something like that. So in countries where the fertility rate is between 1 and 2, or between 0 and 2, religion is also shrinking. There are fewer and fewer religious persons in those countries. But the exact opposite is happening in countries with high fertility rates. So in a country like Albania or Afghanistan, where the fertility rate is higher than 2, especially among the Islamic population, the religiosity or the membership in religious institutions or the number of people that attend mosque worship services or read the Quran on a daily basis, however you measure it, that's all directly correlative to fertility rates. And if you look at subcultures in America, it's kind of the same thing. So if you have a traditionalist Catholic subculture, they tend to have more children, and they're also more likely to be religious and to not lose their faith, say, when they go to college. So that's very interesting. There's a lot of work being done on fertility rates and the connection between fertility rates and religious belief. Evangelical Christianity is now 77% non-white, claiming 386 million adherents worldwide. So evangelical Christianity would be, we have Bethel Evangelical Free Church here. It's a kind of a broad term. There are elements of Reformed theology, Lutheran theology, even Baptist theology in evangelical Christianity. I think evangelicals trace their heritage back to the mid-19th century also, when different churches kind of got amalgamated and there are different unions of different churches, and churches that were historically Dutch Reformed, welcomed Germans and English into their churches, and they became kind of a new thing. And evangelicalism then began to explode in the 20th century with all these missionary conferences that were held by evangelical institutions, and someone like Billy Graham, an evangelical. He's not Billy Graham, I'm a Catholic, or Billy Graham, I'm a Lutheran, right? He's this pan-conservative Christian, not a progressive, right? But he's focused on kind of two broad evangelical and progressive. We can compare and contrast these. But these are kind of the two broad divisions right now. Evangelicalism is more focused on, personal salvation, faith. This is hard to write on. Personal salvation, faith. I'd even say,
Healing.
Bible. Well, feeling could be, but feeling kind of fits into both of these. Progressive is more focused on, system, justice, openness, human rights. This would include LGBTQ stuff. Okay, so generally speaking, if you have an evangelical Christian somewhere in the world, he probably won't be fighting for LGBTQ rights in Nigeria. He'll probably be concerned about his personal salvation and winning souls to Christ. If you have a progressive female Lutheran pastor in Colorado, she's probably not as concerned about, the damnation or the salvation of the people in her town in Colorado. She's going to think that everybody is saved, but that there are unjust systems in society that have to be fixed. And the Christian faith provides a very good tool for that or something. So that's kind of the broad breakdown between evangelical and progressive. Obviously, there are people outside of the system, or there are people who are kind of in the middle or whatever. But generally speaking, when you have progressive Christians, they're more focused on human rights abuses and injustices and mercy in the world and kind of transformation at a big level. Evangelicals are concerned more with the gospel, its transformation at a personal level or societal level when it comes to faith. But anyways, so this now claims 386 million adherents worldwide, and 77% of evangelical Christianity is non-white, which is interesting. According to an extensive, I probably should have said exhaustive, Gordon Conwell Seminary study, by 2050 there will be over 3 billion Christians worldwide, making it the first religion to top the 3 billion mark. So currently there are 2 billion Christians in the world, and then about 1 billion Muslims and about 1 billion Hindus, because India is enormous. But by 2050, there will be 3 billion Christians worldwide. That's what all the figures are demonstrating. In 1900, more than half the world's population was unevangelized, 54.3%. In 2020, that percentage has decreased to 28.3%. So in 120 years, the number of unevangelized people in the world has been halved, essentially. Even though the population of the world has, I don't even know what, the population of the world has been exponential in the last 100 years. Totally exponential. But despite that fact, you'd think, most people would think there's something that has been debunked that basically says, okay, if this is, what would these be? Okay, if this is technology, okay, and this is religious belief, basically the more technology you have, the more belief will decline. So if this is people getting a telephone and then septic systems and then post offices and over here are cell phones, in the 80s and 90s, everybody was saying, okay, religious belief is going to sharply decline when technology improves. But actually, it's been basically the opposite. The more technology there's been, the more belief has increased. That's why, as that number shows, the number of unevangelized people has halved, even though the number of people in the world has, quadrupled or whatever, quintupled. So that was a totally false assumption in the 80s and 90s that more technology will lead to more secularization. It actually has not.
One way in which it has helped, all of it is a tool, and it's used for good or bad, like television and all these things can be used in good and bad ways. Computers have helped so much with Bible translation, cutting the time down.
Right.
Which, I look at that and think how many years, I don't remember how many years it used to take to do a translation, and now it still takes a while, but compared to what it used to be. So that is one way in which technology has been a real blessing for the spread of God's word.
Yes, that's true. And because of technology, Bibles could be printed pretty quickly on the Gutenberg press, but with publishing houses today, and machines that they make that you can just press a button and it'll print a complete book in a matter of minutes or whatever. I should have written this down, but something like 110 million Bibles are being printed each year or something. in the world, but that number is going to just be increasing to hundreds of millions of Bibles made each year by the middle of the 21st century. And that's, you can't even record how often people pull up a Bible on their phone or look at a Bible that they're borrowing or whatever. So the number of Bibles that are being produced, I might be off of that number, but it's also skyrocketing
But it's
as well.
in every translation too, I mean.
Yeah, well, there's some there. That's the goal, right? There's still
Right.
some
Oh,
languages.
yeah, but not very many anymore.
Yeah, not many anymore compared to 1900. So just to go back to this, so that's been blown out of the water. That the better technology is, the more people will become secularized. It's the exact opposite. Is that all I wanted to say about that? I think so. By 2050, there will be 1 billion Christians in just Africa. In 1900, 2% of Africans were Christian. So in 1900, there was, I got about 1 million Christians in the whole of Africa, something like that, a few 100,000 Christians in the whole of Africa. By 2050, there will be 1 billion Christians in Africa. By 2050, 33% of Africa will be Christian. Also by 2050, the projections show that among the most Christianized, if you look at the top 10 most Christianized countries in the world by 2050, according to this Gordon Conwell Seminary study, 4 of the top 10 most Christian nations will be African: Ethiopia, Nigeria, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. So 40% of the most Christian nations in the world will be African countries. And if you look at their square footage, I mean, they're not even necessarily that gigantic compared to, Canada, USA, China, Russia.
You used to, in the history of Africa, there were some that were debating this idea that, several of the nations were trying to get the people away from the nomadic life, bring them together in one small area so they could teach them. And we thought that's terrible, because that small area, soon the land was depleted and they had to move their town and everything to another place, but it sure allowed for the spread of Christianity. So, now you look back at it and say, wow, God sure had a plan there, even though we weren't very smart about it.
Right.
And I keep thinking about this problem with our southern borders, What is God planning for those people? Because many of them, I'm just wild and thinking that many are not Christians. What are we going to do?
Yeah. I was listening to a Catholic professor on a podcast again, but he was saying, we should build a wall on Canada to keep their Marxist socialism out of the United States. And then with these Mexican immigrants, we should just, receive them and put their Catholicism to good use, because, so much of Mexico is Catholic, at least culturally.
Nominally.
Yeah.
The only problem is that a wall won't stop ideas.
Right.
It might stop people, but idea and spirit is not going to be stopped by it. And that's a good thing, because we as Christians live by that.
Yes.
What's their projection of all these people in Nigeria? I just count that, because I had a niece that went to Malawi, and there's severe food shortage there.
Oh, yeah.
And I can't see how a country could feed that amount of people.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole nother issue.
That's a whole other thing,
Yeah, but that's definitely what a lot of our billionaires are trying to figure out right now, and with our billionaires who are investing in India and India's farming system, and genetically modified crops and all these things, and drought resistant crops and all of that. And it sounds to me sort of suspicious. You have the most powerful men in the world buying the world's food, but they say it's to protect us and help feed a hungry world. But I mean, that's where it'll have to be, is technology, drought resistant crops, higher yields, figuring out how to do all of that basically with genetic modification, and better irrigation. But the thing is that with all of our new urban landscapes everywhere, we're causing lakes and ponds and rivers to dry up. So irrigation will be increasingly difficult or impossible in some areas.
When we were there, over there, why, that was a question, how come we have such big families when you have such a hard time getting enough food to, because those people were basically eating one meal a day.
Mm-hmm.
And their general idea was, oh, we have to have a whole bunch of kids because we never know how many are going to survive and be able to help us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so have more children, because some of them are going to live.
Mm-hmm.
And to live with that fact that, man, our kids, so many of them are going to die.
Mm-hmm.
That had to be terrible for them, the
Right.
people.
Well, like my niece said, the church that she went to there in Malawi, they had to have a wall around to keep the
Yeah.
people out because this was the only place there was food.
Mm.
And there was actually dead bodies on the outside of the wall that she'd seen.
Whoa.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't even bury them.
Wow. When did she go there?
About 10 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, we'll see, you know, this is also a different topic, but infant mortality rate is also significantly decreasing in Africa and in third world countries as Western medicine is spreading to them, and, you know, better facilities, better technology, et cetera, et cetera. So, but right now the numbers project that, yeah, Africa will have 1 billion Christians by 2050. And Nigeria in particular will probably have a population of around 800 million, just Nigeria, with an estimated 50% of the population being Christian. So Nigeria will have 400 million Christians by 2050. So that's why you can understand why someone has recently written I guess it was an article called "The Future of Christianity is Africa," basically. The future of Christianity is Africa. It'll be interesting to see maybe about, I don't know, maybe a century from now, you know, we Americans, we won't be sending our sons to get a theological education at an American institution because there won't be any left, or they'll be so small and they won't have good faculty, or they'll be so imbued with, you know, radical ideologies that we'll send our kids over to get an education in Nigeria and Ethiopia. That'll be interesting, you know. That could happen one day, because they're the ones that'll have the churches and the Christians and the money and the professors and the opportunities and the learning, you know. Maybe that'll happen. Right now, at least, they're sending their top scholars and pastors over here to get their masters and PhDs, but maybe it'll shift in 100 years.
It keeps shifting around. I mean, last school year we were learning where the church fathers were, and they were in modern day Turkey and modern North Africa. And all that has left and shifted, and
Right.
It'll be shifting again.
Right. Doesn't seem like Christianity is going to go back to Turkey anytime soon. Israel, Jordan, Iraq, you know, but definitely Africa, definitely sub-Saharan Africa, where Islam is not as powerful as it is in Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt. Let's talk about ideological trends now. So this is just belief or the lack of belief in general. In 1970, there were 165 million atheists. Today, there are 147 million atheists. Christianity is currently growing at a 5 times faster rate than atheism. I think we talked about that before.
Is this in the whole world?
The whole world.
Okay.
Yep, in the whole world, which, let's be honest, primarily is just the West, because there are not many atheists in Africa. You know, so of the 147 million atheists today, a vast majority of them live in North America and Europe. But Christianity is growing 5 times more quickly than atheism is growing, which again, in 1970, 1980, 1990, everybody was saying exactly the opposite. Oh, there are 170 million atheists. We project that number will be doubled in 50 years. And, you know, yada, yada, yada. But exactly the opposite has happened. Atheism has decreased and religiosity has increased, especially in Islam, Hinduism, and Christianity. by 2050, Pentecostal charismatic Christians will outnumber non-religious persons in the world. The estimate, 1 billion Pentecostals and charismatics compared to 850 million non-religious. So that, I also got that from, I think, that Gordon Conwell seminary study. But that's pretty stunning. So Pentecostal charismatic, we have a couple of Pentecostal churches in town. One of them is by Lakeview Methodist, and then one is here on Prairie and 4th. So I think, right, those are our two Pentecostal churches. So Pentecostal churches have a very loose structure or no structure. They are Pentecostal, which means they're moved by the Spirit. They're a Spirit-filled church. You often see people reacting with ecstasy during worship, or speaking in tongues, or people being moved to give a message. There's no hierarchy. Typically the pastor is just whoever is the most Spirit-filled and educated person, rather than someone who has gone through an ordination process.
I always wondered about that because down near Norfolk, that church body had more to display during like our 4th of July parades and stuff. They were always out there and a whole pile of people with their witness.
Yeah.
And where's the Lutherans?
Yeah,
there they are down there.
They're getting there.
They just weren't out there like those people.
Yeah, the Pentecostal church in Guatemala is exploding. I mean, every time we go back to El Paraíso, there's a new Pentecostal church either in the town, in the village, which has like 100 families, or in a surrounding village. There's a new church every year, and it'll just be a little structure made out of cinder blocks, and it'll have a sign that'll say, the Church of Jesus or something on it, or the Church of the Spirit. And it'll just be packed with people and thumping music, loud music. But Pentecostalism is just growing and exploding. I mean, by 2050, 1 billion people in the world will be Pentecostal. That's pretty amazing. I think I read a book recently that said basically every week in the early 2000s or 2010s, every week 25,000 people became Pentecostal. So that's how quickly their numbers were growing. But you can see why it can grow so fast. It doesn't. When they plant a new church, they don't have to say, we better contact Synod and we have to get all this approval and support. If you want to just go and start a new church in somebody's basement, you can go do that. And if everybody's speaking in tongues, maybe next week your church will have 100 people all of a sudden because of the experience and the excitement and the just exactly. That's everything that's going on.
People are seeking God. I mean, they don't know what they're seeking, but that's what they're seeking.
Yeah, seeking God. Christianity, as you've already guessed, has sharply declined in Europe, with 55% of young people, that'd be 16 to 29, now in the nun category. So you hear about this. There are all these books and articles called, The Rise of the Nuns, or the creation of the nuns. And they're not talking about nuns as in religious women, religious sisters. We're talking about nuns like this, people who claim to have no religious affiliation. When it says, what's your religious affiliation? Christian, Hindu, Buddhist? None is at the bottom, right? And in Europe, 55% of young people will tick that box that says none at the bottom of the list. With low fertility rates and increasing numbers of religious Asian and African immigrants, however, the numbers will continue to morph and change until 2050. So it's interesting to see if you were to, go to the future in 2050, go to some place like Germany and look at the religious affiliation of whites and non-whites. So white native-born Germans and then non-white, say, Turkish immigrants or other immigrants from the Middle East. I mean, obviously the birth rates will be way different, and so will the religious affiliation and the religious belief. So when the more Africans and Middle Easterners that move into Europe, the higher those enclaves and immigrant groups will reproduce and will spread their religion or try to spread their religion. Okay, in the last few minutes, this is much more speculative now, but we're going to talk about theological trends. So what will people believe, teach, and confess in the future? What will the science or the study of theology look like at the academy? The academy just means university and seminary education and just scholarship in general. It's rather difficult to predict where exactly theology will go in the next century, but we can make some educated guesses. I think at the very top is that Western theology will increasingly interact with African and Asian theologians into the 21st century, especially female and LGBTQ plus theologians. So I just read an article about the top 10 female African theologians of the 21st century so far, and I'd say a majority of them were either lesbian or transgender or queer, or they were doing work in that area, in the field of gender studies and theology. So I could see that bottoming out though, because Pentecostals and evangelicals are not too keen on social justice, progressivist, woke, LGBTQ rights-oriented stuff. They're more focused on personal transformation and by the gospel and salvation. So I think as you see Africa kind of taking the world over in terms of Christianity, I think you're going to see a drop-off on that. But I think you'll see an increase of Western pastors and theologians interacting with African theologians and Asian theologians. So right now, there's an Asian theologian, a Japanese one I've read, named I can't remember his name. Well, Kosuke Koyama is one of them, and the other one I'm thinking of, Kazuo Kitamori. So there are these two Japanese theologians who are really interesting, but there's hardly anything that exists on them in the West. I mean, I think a couple of their books have been translated in English, but nobody is talking about them or citing them or anything. But I think the more and more Christianity will spread to Asia and Africa and will displace Western Christianity, we won't be focused on our people as much. There will be new and exciting things to do with African theologians. Also, theology, this is my opinion, the second most important prediction for theology in the 21st century. Theology will have to contend more with the problem of technology and the many negative ecological and biological consequences of technology. The loss of privacy, the rise of pornography, you could say desertification, over-mining, deforestation, pollution. I mean, wherever you go, with more technologies, with more cars, with more computers, with more whatever, there are also many more problems. Even though we fixed a lot of problems, there are many more problems, and theology is going to have to really come to terms with the problem of technology, which is a very old problem.
Right now, our cancel culture is canceling and taking Christian viewpoints off of the internet.
Yeah.
So there are more and more that are losing their ability to speak freely in our country, and
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
scary.
Yeah, that's another. Yeah, that's. I mean, connected to propaganda, people, the reigning ideology, I would say. But yeah, and also, theology will. Right now, we see, YouTube is just 2007. YouTube is very new still. It's only 13, 14 years old. So, and look at how Christians have been using YouTube to spread the message of the gospel. I mean, it's a very new thing, but that's gonna explode. I've heard it say that YouTube, blows the printing press out of the water, because the printing press could reproduce texts, but you still had to have a literate society. You still had to have money and the means of producing books and allowing people to understand those books. With YouTube, almost any kid anywhere, and kids all around the world now have phones. Any kid anywhere can pull up and say, who is this Pastor Jones? What does he have to say about whatever? And he can watch it, and he can change his life. He can convert. Kathy, did you have something?
Yeah, what would we have done without technology during the pandemic?
Yeah.
When we couldn't have access to a physical church building.
Right.
So, YouTube and the internet provided us with opportunities to worship.
Right. And now, unfortunately, we're seeing that it's also doing something else for many
Correct.
Christians around the world.
Well, we have to remember when all those things you're talking about, like with agriculture, desertification, all those things, whatever we try to do, every solution creates a problem, or sometimes more than one. And Kathy just mentioned that. It's been such a help, but then it can be negative. People are saying, well, it was great, watching church or going to church at home in
Not
my
having
living
to
room
Go to church.
in
Yeah.
my pajamas and I don't need this now. So, you know, it's how it's used and all that.
Definitely.
But, you know, it's human solutions, and so they're never perfect and never will be. But that's something that people need to keep in mind. I mean, I've heard people say things since the pandemic started. Well, maybe a vaccine will be the answer. And it's like, no, there is no thing that is a perfect solution.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there isn't one.
Especially if you think of the problem that the virus itself, did it come from some guy biting a bat off of a head like Ozzy Osbourne, or did it come from something a little bit more, politically motivated, or at least, if it wasn't politically motivated, at least it was people tinkering and playing God in a lab somewhere. Well, we know where that somewhere is.
God is in control.
God is in control, which we have to keep telling ourselves because that's the truth. But yeah, indeed. A few more here. Catholic theologian who you probably haven't heard of, but his name is Hans Urs von Balthazar. Great name. He lived 1905 to 1988. Will be one of the principal theologians studied in the 21st century. That's again just one of my predictions or opinions. Because he wrote so many books. He wrote 85 books or something like that. And a lot of Protestants are just beginning to discover this guy. But he wrote on music, art, architecture. He wrote about drama. He was one of the most well-read Christian theologians of the entire last century. And he just wrote on so many different issues. So there's a lot to look at with his work. And in his work, he offered a threefold schema for doing theology. This is really interesting. He said, he didn't say, this is someone summarizing Balthazar, but basically theology can be conducted as epic, in which it knows all the answers and is impatient with ambiguity. Think about the, Homer's epic, the Iliad or the Odyssey, or think about another epic tale or epic story. It can be conducted as lyric, in which all truth is subjective and romantic and is conducted at the level of feelings. So some people do theology as if we have all the answers, there's no ambiguity. Some people do theology as if it's lyrical, it's totally subjective, this makes me feel good, this doesn't. How is this beautiful, how is this ugly? Or it can be conducted as drama, and that's what von Balthazar himself advocates, in which characters are genuinely open to one another, the outcome is undetermined, and all are alert to the divine author. So by the outcome being undetermined, he's not saying predestination is not a thing or something like that. He means that God gives us a great deal of freedom when it comes to, we were free in 1947 to take our rural parish and relocate it into the city of Fairmont because of all the GIs coming home and new families and baby boomers, right? So the outcome is undetermined when that happened, if it would be successful or not. And God gives us that freedom, but we're always alert to the divine author, right? He's the playwright of the drama. He's writing everything, but we are acting it out. And so that's kind of how he advocates doing theology, as more of a drama. Okay, different thing now. In the academy, that would be universities and seminaries, there will be more and more attempts to overcome the century-long divides between religious studies and theology, as well as biblical studies and theology. The fact that there is a divide probably sounds strange to us. So I don't know if you knew this, but if you go and you study let's say you go to the University of Minnesota and study religious studies, your professor, your classmates, they might have absolutely no religious affiliation. They might be completely agnostic. They might be Christian. They may be progressive Christian. Maybe they're Buddhist, but they have, they're open to Hinduism. Maybe if you go to just a state university and study religious studies, there's supposedly no bias here. It's kind of a neutral science. You go to understand the tenets of Zoroastrianism at University of Minnesota. However, if you go to, say, Duke or University of Chicago and you study theology, you'll probably have professors who are ordained in probably a liberal Methodist or Episcopalian denomination, and you'll be doing theology for the sake of the church. That is, you'll be studying Christian theologians as a Christian, and you'll come to Christian conclusions. And what's happening now is that there's a divide between these where, religious studies people might look down on theologians because they're biased by being Christian. Theologians might look down on religious studies as just being this completely secular endeavor that's not helpful to anybody. And what you're going to see is a breakdown of this divide where there will be more dialogue between Christian theologians and secular religious studies programs, and likewise there will be a breakdown between biblical studies and theology. So that'll sound really weird to you as Lutherans, but if you were to go again, say go to the University of Glasgow, where I did my master's, the biblical studies people, they're studying the texts of the Bible in a very, again, scientific kind of technical way. They're not going to necessarily interact with Martin Luther. They're not going to interact with theologians, with preachers, with pastors. They'll be doing this kind of, again, more of a neutral scientific thing, trying to uncover the dimensions of a particular text that they're looking at. But then you have theologians saying, no, the Bible doesn't belong to you guys. The Bible belongs to the church. You can't just be a neutral, tinkerer with the text. We have to come into contact with each other again. So you're going to see during the century, I think that theology and biblical studies and theology and religious studies are going to come back together again. But that probably sounds weird to you, but that's probably going to happen. There is a divide there. But anyways, I also think costly seminary education will be offset by significant online programs of study. So that'll be interesting to see. Seminaries, it's so expensive if you think about it. 4 more years after college, and that's to get a Master's of Divinity to be ordained in our country. Well, there will probably be more interesting programs and online solutions that are cheaper, that are widespread, that you can do anywhere. Also, costly churches will be replaced by other models. So how expensive is it to have a church with a parking lot and power and AC and everything else? Well, it's very costly. Repairs. So we already see this in Pentecostalism, a proliferation of house churches. And then in evangelicalism in America, we see a proliferation of theater churches. So movie theater or high school auditorium that on Sunday mornings is a church, but during the week is an auditorium for the high school or is a theater for whomever. Also strip mall churches. So how many dead strip malls are there across the United States? Countless. How many people who own those strip malls would just love to sell it to someone? And you see recently churches buying up strip malls or little stores, little shops, and just converting them into churches. I can think of several in the Chicagoland area that I've seen. And to support themselves, maybe they'll have a coffee shop and something else, and that revenue then will help enhance the offerings and the tithes that they accept. Because in the future, in America and in Western nations with declining Christian populations, offering and tithes will not be enough to upkeep buildings and programs. There will have to be other ways of gathering money, such as distilleries, for example, or breweries. There'd be a good way to support Martin Luther. Open a distillery in downtown Fairmont. That place would be packed, right? Just go to a distillery in the cities, or go to Shell's, or go to any. I mean, people just want to get out and drink and with friends and family. And some breweries now are building playgrounds, so that families can go to a brewery and the kids can play. In Columbia, Missouri, there's a brewery called Logboat, and they have, bocce ball courts, playground equipment, balance beams, all these things, and it's just, they thought that they would get all the college kids, but they're instead getting families. And young families, well, guess what? If you're a young family, you're probably more likely to be Christian, too, if you're having children, as we know about fertility rates.
We just got a brewery okayed for Fairmont downtown.
We did. I hope it opens for Oktoberfest.
They're planning on it.
Yeah. And then finally, to conclude, worker priests will probably change the landscape of the Christian church in the West. So worker priest would be, here's this man, he drives a truck Monday through Thursday, but then on the weekends he's my pastor. and a worker priest can obviously be doing any kind of work. Typically, they are teachers of some kind. And worker priest is a term for all clergy, not just Catholic, but someone who does some kind of work outside of the official church business, but then still preaches, teaches, and administers the sacraments on the weekend.
Well, that was kind of the position that some of our western Nebraska churches had, because they were so spread out,
right,
people, that they couldn't come together and meet as a church and have a building and everything. And
right.
so there's a lot of lay pastors.
Yes, and there are other solutions too. SMP would be one, and the LCMS SMP would be, if we eventually realize we need a third pastor, and then we identify someone like, say, Reed Wokash, who could be a part-time pastor on the weekends, he would go through an SMP program where he'd have to go to the seminary maybe something like 4 times for a couple weeks each time, but then would be taking online classes and Zooming with professors and doing work at home, and then eventually he would be ordained, but would not receive a master's degree, would receive an SMP certificate or something like that. And then there are also all sorts of other programs tried out by the Synod and by other synods. But anyways, we're going to see a lot more of that, I think, because pastors are, if you think about all the years of education I had, if you just count it up, 4 years of college, 4 years of seminary, 1 year of graduate school, now I've been at St. John's for 2 or 3 years. That's so much money, You just can't sustain that if people aren't having babies and aren't giving as much money to the church. But anyways, that concludes our lesson today. I'm going to turn this off.